I'm excited to continue advancing our understanding of racism and our promotion of social justice, not only on our campus community, but for you all to take this information with you into your communities and on a larger scale. The data from our first session indicates that we are in fact moving the needle forward. And that's what this is all about. Last week, we learned about systemic racism and the ways in which racism was built into the fabric of this nation, and how it can be seen in various systems throughout our society. Today, we're going to continue that conversation and move forward by looking at how systemic racism can and has impacted people of color on an individual level, right? So last week we focused on the systems. This week we're going to take things to the individual level, looking specifically at what does racism look like today? What are the signs and symptoms of racism? And we have two wonderful presenters to share that knowledge with us. As a reminder, each of our sessions will include a brief lecture from a member of our faculty, a cultural infusion marked by music representing the movement, a research-based presentation by a Stockton staff member, and perhaps the most exciting for all of you, a question and answer with the presenters, as well as a chance to hear from and interact with our students. So with that said, I have the distinct pleasure of introducing our first speaker, Dr. Zori Kalibatseva. She is an assistant professor in the psychology program. She earned her PhD in clinical psychology with a focus on multicultural psychology from Michigan State University. Dr. Kalibatseva's teaching and research interests focus on understanding the influence of cultural factors on psychological distress and treatment among multicultural and diverse individuals. She teaches cross-cultural psychology, abnormal psychology, personality, and culture and mental health at Stockton. So if you're interested in any of those courses, go look for Dr. Kalibatseva. Her research centers on cultural variations in depression among racial and ethnic minorities and immigrants, and it aims to disentangle mental health disparities. Dr. Kalibatseva has published over 20 articles and 10 book chapters on topics related to racial and ethnic minority mental health, as well as cross-cultural assessment and psychopathology. Please join me in welcoming our first speaker, Dr. Zori Kalibatseva.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Johnson, for this introduction. I'm going to share my slides. And I really would like to welcome you all, and it's an honor to be with you here today. I would also like to thank Dr. Johnson for inviting me to this important event. In the first community conversation that we had with Dr. Allison and with Mr. Davis, we discussed definitions of race and racism and its history and examples of institutional racism in various areas such as education, housing, and the criminal justice system. So in this session, we'll be talking about understanding systemic racism, as Dr. Johnson said, at the individual level, and I'll be talking about various signs and symptoms. So connecting what we had talked about in the previous community conversation, as a reminder, individual racism is the personal belief that there's superiority of one race over another, and it is linked to racial prejudice and discriminatory behaviors. Now, discrimination is a little different in that it's the prejudicial treatment of a person based solely on their membership in a specific group. So as it pertains to race, racial discrimination would be an African American being less likely to be offered a job than a European American because of their race. And there are real consequences to racial discrimination that people feel at all levels. So we discussed some of them last time related to the educational system, to employment, to housing, a lot of them at the systemic level, then that trickle down to the individual level. Today, we'll talk about how racial discrimination can really affect a person's health and mental health. So there's overwhelming amount of research that shows that racial discrimination is associated with worse health and physical health and mental health. Based on a meta-analysis that reviewed over 134 studies, this is a consistent finding that we've seen, showing that people who report experiencing racial discrimination have higher rates of depression, about 1.5 to 2 times higher rates of depression, of anxiety, psychosis, and substance use. And generally, we also, with the current times that we live in and the pandemic, we also have seen a large increase of reports in the experience of stress. So Black Americans in July 2020 reported that 2 in 3, that 67% of Black Americans reported discrimination as a significant source of stress, and that increased from 55%. So the current pandemic and also the current racial climate has really increased the experience of stress, which then is related to chronic stresses related to negative outcomes in health. Now, another area that is connected to racism and racial discrimination in health is racial health disparities. So a disparity is a difference in which disadvantaged social groups, such as racial ethnic minorities, who have persistently experienced social disadvantage or discrimination, now experience worse health or greater health risks than advantaged social groups, such as whites. So racial disparities in health in the US are large and very pervasive. For most of the 15 leading causes of death that we have, like heart disease, stroke, diabetes, kidney disease, hypertension, we see African Americans and Latinos having higher death rates than whites. And one of the topics that I talk about in 3 of my classes is also that African American mothers are more likely to give premature birth that's linked to chronic stress and racism and discrimination. And so this is something that impacts babies in the womb, if we think about it. So the start that someone would get in life is already something that's negatively affected simply by the chronic stress and experiences that a pregnant mom would have. So what does racism look like today? This is something that has shifted from more overt ways of being racist, and that's something that Dr. Allison talked about historically, and now we're in a time when there's probably more prevalent ways of covert racism. So those are subtle, ambiguous, complex racist incidents that we have that operate at institutional and cultural levels. And these forms of racism can be confusing because they often are not necessarily explicit and not something that people can very easily decode. So they also are maintaining the status quo in our society, and we're born into these forms of covert racism, and it's more difficult to recognize them. But what the research shows us is that they still affect us in the same ways as overt racism, and people still experience chronic stress related to racial discrimination from covert types of racism. So microaggressions are a great example, and you may have heard this term before. Microaggressions are brief and commonplace daily verbal, behavioral, and environmental indignities, whether intentional or unintentional, and they are hostile, derogatory, negative racial slights or insults that potentially have harmful or unpleasant psychological impact on the target person or group. So simply stated, that's a lot of text there, but simply stated, microaggressions are brief, everyday exchanges that send demeaning messages to people of color because they belong to a specific racial minority group. And we'll talk about a number of different examples in the next slides. Now, white individuals may unconsciously perpetrate these Eurocentric attitudes of white supremacy, in effect then causing individuals of color to feel invalidated or inferior. And remember, intent here is not necessary. It can be something unintentional, so that's where it's really important to think about how we can educate ourselves about what we say and the impact that it can have on other people. So this picture shows you a number of common racial microaggressions that people may experience, or things that you yourself may have said to other people. So no one is immune from inheriting racial, gender, and sexual orientation biases. We all develop biases from very early on. And I would like you to think about the last time you either said something similar to a person or someone said this to you. Things like, what are you? Or you're not like other Muslim people. Or what do your people think about that? As if you're representing your entire race or religious group or a specific group that you may identify with. And you may have not realized that you were the victim of of a microaggression if someone said that to you, or you may have not realized that you perpetrated a racial microaggression. So there are a number of themes that these microaggressions can be grouped into and the messages that they communicate to people. One common one is asking a person of color where they're from or telling them that they speak good English. So this is something that would communicate often that you're not American or you're a foreigner, even if the person was born, grew up their entire life in the US, and that is the theme of being an alien in your own land. You're not recognized as part of the white majority and assumed that you came from somewhere else. Another theme is related to intelligence. So statements like, you're so articulate and smart, or you're a credit to your race. Or asking an Asian person to solve a math problem. These are all things that communicate, the first two microaggressions communicate that people of color are generally less intelligent than whites. And the last example is communicating that all Asians are good at math. The third example here is color blindness. And often that's seen as a statement or a theme that is positive because we're all the same. But what really often is neglected in a statement like that, like America is a melting pot, or there's only one race, the human race, all lives matter. So this is something that is assuming that everyone needs to assimilate to the dominant culture. You deny the individual their specific experience as a racist and cultural being. And in doing that, then that really communicates to them that their race and ethnicity is not important despite all of the discrimination that they may have experienced. Finally, there's the criminality or assumption of criminality theme. So when a person of color is walking into a store and the store owner or other customers are following them around, or a white person's clutching their possessions, their wallet, because they see a Black or Latino person approaching, those will be behaviors that are microaggressions in assuming, again, that you are going to steal, you're poor, you do not belong here, you're a criminal. These microaggressions then can have an effect on one's mental health. They are confusing, often shocking and distressing experiences. And generally, we see college students in particular reporting anywhere between a quarter to a half of students reporting that they've experienced microaggressions in the classroom or on campus. And this is data from the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, which is a predominantly white institution. That may vary based on the institution where you're at. But when one of these experiences happens, often people are really trying to think about, well, why did this really occur? Should I respond to it? How should I respond to it? And generally, often there's a need for what we call a sanity check. So a victim of a microaggression may often turn to others who've witnessed the interaction to get a validation of, what, did you really see this? Did this person really say this to me, or did they really act in this way? And people of color often do not feel that they have dealt effectively with microaggressions when they occurred. So that can then further lead to chronic psychological distress as you play that interaction or that incident over and over again, trying to think about what just happened. So that may lead to regret, remorse, guilt, shame. You may come up with multiple ways to respond to that microaggression later on, but not in the moment. So people who experience microaggressions then report worse mental health that's associated with higher levels of stress, depression, and anxiety. Now, what can we do to respond in the moment? Because this is really important in moving the conversation from talking about this is an issue to coming up with specific ways in which each one of us individually can do something to address the issues. Now, if you're the target, one of the most important things to consider is what the context is. Is the microaggression committed by someone who you don't care about maintaining a relationship with? Or is it someone who you have a good, close relationship with? As we said, no one's immune to perpetrating a microaggression. So if the microaggressor is someone who you're closely connected with, then you may want to still keep that relationship. So that means that you may want to then have a separate time or schedule a time to talk to them about what just happened and what that experience was like for you. Safety is also an important thing to consider. Can you respond in a way in which you would feel safe in that environment? And of course, you can choose to respond to a microaggression, but the important thing there will be to do it in a way where you're, thinking about what the repercussions of that might be. So within the relationships where you may be talking to a supervisor or to a person in a position of power, that makes it more difficult than to have that conversation. But at the same time, it is important to have the conversation as long as you feel safe, to acknowledge that this person in a position of power has said or done something that is a microaggression. The next thing is to also take care of yourself. So as we talked about in the previous slide, this leads to having higher levels of stress, depression, anxiety. So having the social support and the network with people where you can discuss what just happened would be really important, and to be able to process those experiences. If you're a bystander, it would be really important to be an ally in a moment where someone has perpetrated a microaggression. So that would mean that voices of allies often can be heard more powerfully than those who are directly involved in the interaction. And when the targets of microaggressions complain, often the microaggressor may dismiss them and say that, oh, they're just biased, they're overly sensitive, they're being angry. But if you are an ally who's speaking up, then you can do it in a way that really establishes that what you just did was a microaggression, and that's not okay. And it would be important to speak for yourself as the ally, as opposed to speak for the person who was the victim of the microaggression. And finally, if you are the microaggressor, even those of us with the best intentions can inadvertently commit microaggressions. So taking responsibility of what you said or what you did is going to increase your understanding of your own privileges, and trying to not be defensive in the moment. So that may mean that you take a minute or more to think about what you just said and the effect that it had on the other person, and acknowledge that there's hurt that you have caused, and apologize and reflect on it, as opposed to immediately become defensive. So going back to where we started, remember the larger context here is that a microaggression is a covert form of racism, which was bred by an previously overt racism, and that plays into institutional and systemic racism, which is embedded within the larger systems throughout our society. So there are various things we can do at the individual level to address microaggressions, and this helps then to address racism at the societal and the systemic level. And the last slide that I have here is going to focus on Latinx experiences of discrimination in mental health, in transitioning to Dr. Rodriguez's talk. So thinking about the Latinx experience, and generally what we see among the Latinx community related to mental health, Latinx adults are at risk for psychological distress, depression, and anxiety the longer they have been in the US. And this is true, so if you're a second or a third generation Latinx adult, then that also means that your mental health may be worse over time. That's known as the immigrant or a paradox. And so for the college student population, what we see is that Latinx students may experience interpersonal microaggressions, racial jokes, institutional microaggressions, and those result in rejection, race-related stress, and stereotype threat. And Dr. Rodriguez will talk about the importance of understanding what the racial and cultural experiences of Latinx first-gen students are, so that we can then move the field forward in terms of what is it that we can do with actions to change the course of having these experiences and the negative impact that they cause. So thank you all for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Kalibatsova. This talk was extremely important in advancing our next steps as a part of this community conversation. So I hope that you all have advanced your understanding of what racism looks like at the individual level, right? Systemic racism is important and perhaps fundamental to cementing our understanding of racism. But it's also critical that we know how to identify what racism looks like on a daily basis. Beyond the structural and the institutional racism that we discussed in the last session, we have to also understand individual racism, individual level racism, so that we can actually address it, right? We can address it in conversations with our peers and our colleagues, at our dinner table with family members, and in a host of other contexts. So thank you again for offering an opportunity for us to advance our understanding of what racism can look like today. At this time, I'm excited to introduce our second speaker, Dr. Rodriguez, who will be sharing an empirical example from her own research that specifically highlights the impact of discrimination and racism on Latinx students. It's important to note that the planning team and I were very intentional about accurately representing all Black and Brown people in this series, to demonstrate that darker-skinned Black people are not the only ones impacted by racism, but instead all our narratives should be included in this larger conversation. So thank you, Dr. Rodriguez, for bringing the Latinx experience to light. I'm pleased again to introduce Dr. Rodriguez, who joined us as the Director of Student Transition Programs in 2019. Her goal was to promote, and is still to promote, inclusive student success and retention from orientation through to graduation. She has since co-developed and co-taught Inclusive Student Transitions, a course centered on training student leaders to advance inclusive student success among their peers. Dr. Rodriguez is a Camden native, an ELF and Trio McNair alumna, and brings a decade of experience developing student success programs that serve the needs of first year, transfer, upper class, first gen, and adult students as both an administrator and an instructor. Her mission is to support the university's strategic priorities of increasing degree completion and closing equity gaps in academic achievement and degree attainment. Dr. Rodriguez completed her doctorate in education at Rutgers University, her master's degree from Columbia University Teachers College, and her bachelor's in psychology from Rutgers University, New Brunswick. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Rodriguez as our second speaker for this afternoon.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Dr. Johnson. So I'm going to be able to share a little bit of my dissertation study, which I conducted, which I defended in 2018. And so my study is on the Latinx student population because that was the population that had the lowest graduation rates at the institution that I was studying at the time. Initially, I wanted to look at all students of color, but when I narrowed in on the data, I saw that Latinx students were struggling more at that particular institution. And so just to give you some data that I looked into in 2020, actually recently, I saw that the Department of Education listed that 13% of Latinx students actually obtained a bachelor's degree compared to 65% for white students. And that was during the 2015-2016 academic year. And so that gap right there, that disparity is what led me to look more into the reasons, the potential factors that that influence students' persistence at a college. And so I'm going to share my screen. So the title of my study is "Why Do I Feel Homesick at a Diverse University?" That was a particular quote from one of the subjects who participated in my study. And so the institution that I worked at, that I did my dissertation study on, was considered a diverse university, but students still felt like they were not at home at this institution. And so it was a study on the Latinx first generation college students, and my research questions are listed here. What are the racial and cultural campus experiences of Latinx first generation college students on a racially and ethnically diverse campus? What aspects of the campus, if any, influenced feelings of exclusion and or inclusion for Latinx first generation students? And so when you do research, it's also considered me-search. So as I was enrolled in a college, I noticed that when I would go into classrooms, there weren't many people who looked like me. It's many students and many professors or staff who looked like me. And so this is another reason that I decided to focus my study on this population. And so here are some of my findings. What I found was that almost all of the participants stated that they did have a positive perception and attitude when it was among the same racial ethnic group. So being among same racial ethnic group, they had positive feelings about being at this institution that I was studying. On the other hand, almost or more than half of the students that participated in the study, they noticed segregation in the classrooms, the resident halls, and social settings. So like the cafeteria, for example, the dining hall. But also 70% experienced and or witnessed microaggressions. One example that came up on during multiple interviews was a talent show that actually took place, where a white student decided to make his talent eat a burrito. He ate a burrito, that was his talent, while wearing a sombrero hat, which is what Mexicans typically wear, fiestas, and there was like mariachi music playing in the background. And all of this sort of took place at this talent show, and it created a dialogue on Facebook. And the students actually stepped up and stepped out and reacted or responded to that incident. So that's an example of a microaggression. And so it had a real heavy impact on the students of color. In addition, in terms of the express statements about invisibility, so 100%, like all of the students who participated in my study, they expressed that there was a lack of Latino, Latinx faculty and staff visible on the campus, as well as culture. So the tradition, the music, the food, the art. Almost all of the students who participated in the study, they acknowledged that Latinx people provided emotional support on campus. Their college counselors like EOF, the students in the Latino student organizations. 70% also acknowledged that culturally relevant curriculum and programs, they increase these feelings of belonging. And all of the students expressed a need for more diversity, and specifically a need for the Latinx culture to be integrated into areas of student affairs, such as programming, student support services, but also in academic affairs. So in the classroom, the curriculum, as I mentioned before, professors as well was another mention in terms of integrating more Latinx staff or faculty in academia. Here are some supporting quotes from the students in my study. Iris, she mentioned, when it comes to the teachers, I feel like I wish I could see more professors of my background teaching, not Spanish class, but history or something like that, because it'll be nice to know that, okay, I've seen a professor who's of my descent. Maybe they went through my challenges, so maybe I could do it too. Jessica mentioned, why do I feel homesick or something? I was like, why do I feel like I'm not happy? I feel something is wrong. I look around my surroundings and I was like, well, I really don't have any Spanish person to feel like I have someone to talk to. Then once the end of the semester came, I met a couple Spanish people and I was like, all right, this is what I needed. I have a Spanish friend on second floor too, but I would see them every other week. Maybe this is what I need, a diverse group of friends, not diverse, but someone that's Spanish too. Not Ecuadorian, but someone Spanish that understands. And what she's talking about is like, sometimes, you know, it feels comforting to be able to reference jokes, cultural related jokes, without having to always explain. That can, you know, be exhausting, that to always have to explain some things about your culture. And so I would like to share a video that talks about the Latina experience on a college campus. Let me stop sharing and reshare my screen with sound, because I think that this pretty much reinforces my study. And if you would like to find the entire YouTube video, because this was cut short for the purpose of this presentation. You can go on YouTube and find it, and the name of the student, if you Google or YouTube the name of the student, you'll be able to find it easily.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Rodriguez. And I hope that you all enjoyed that very powerful spoken word by Janelle. I invite you all at this time to turn your cameras on if you are comfortable doing so. The next segment is one of my absolute favorites, and I would venture to say the same for many of the folks on the planning committee for this series. And so what we're going to do now is what we have categorized as a cultural infusion, right? So as I mentioned previously, it's important that we recognize the experiences of all Black and Brown people, specifically in our context, the experiences of all Black and Brown students. This next song, which I'm going to allow you all to select using the polls feature of Zoom, is really going to bring us back to the core of what this portion of the series is about, understanding systemic racism, right? And looking at what that looks like and what that means for people of color on a daily basis. So I am going to launch the polls now, and I invite you to indicate the song. If you know these songs, feel free to select one. If you don't know, you're still welcome to vote if one of them pique your interest. But I'm very excited to share with you some music that represents the struggles of Black and Brown people, not only at Stockton and not only at colleges and institutions across the country, but nationwide. So I see that a few of you are still voting, so I'll give you another moment or two. And then as we started last session, I will excitedly surprise you with the chosen selection for today. So thank you all for voting. I see that most of you have now voted, so I'm going to go ahead and end the poll. And what you will see next is my screen with the song that was chosen for this session. Please enjoy. Thank you all for listening and reflecting. I hope that the imagery and some of the words of that song rung true or help to solidify some of what you're learning in this series. It's important for us to recognize, even though we're talking about individual level racism, that many of this, as Dr. Kalabatseva and Rodriguez alluded to, is embedded in and rooted in systemic racism, which we learned quite a bit about in our first session. So a lot of the imagery that we saw looked at slavery and looked at the prison system and where's the connection between those two things, right? And thank you, Dr. Allison, for making that connection for us in our first session, right? So we want to continue this conversation despite our focus on the individuals and what we're experiencing on a daily basis. We cannot forget where that's coming from, right? And so I hope that this brought you back. If you were here for the first session, I hope that gave you a bit of a reflective moment from that experience. At this time, we are going to give you an opportunity to not only be passive participants of this knowledge being created here, but to interact with us. This is now your opportunity to ask questions of the presenters. As I mentioned earlier, they both came to us with examples of the Latinx community, as well as some really fundamental pieces of the literature in terms of discrimination and microaggressions. So if any of that was new to you as students or even as staff and faculty members, please feel free to ask your questions at this time. If you have any audio issues, please feel free to place your questions in the chat and I will be happy to share them with the presenter on your behalf. Any questions for our presenters at this time? Feel free to unmute yourself. I can't see everyone on the screen, so if you're raising your hand, I might miss you. If you have a question, feel free to just go ahead and unmute and ask your question at this time. All right, well, I will go ahead and invite our presenters to share with you any final thoughts that they have in regards to their talks. And then we have even more excitement coming. So I do see something in the chat, just a moment. I think Dr. Ferry may have a question in a moment. So I'll allow Dr. Kalabatsova and Rodriguez to share any closing thoughts in regards to their topics and tying that together with this session before we move on to the more student-focused and interactive portion of this session.
I had a quick question, but for some reason, it wasn't allowing me to unmute.
Okay, great.
So,
feel free.
I actually did have I was working on trying to unmute the whole time, but I have a question for Dr. Rodriguez regarding her study. And at the university where you did your study, Dr. Rodriguez, did you find that there were also challenges for African American and Latinx students to come together and kind of find that comfort you were talking about in one another? Were there still challenges with that?
I think in terms of like the EOF programs, they meshed well, right? They integrated. But if you were not a part of a program like EOF, then I did see some challenges with or the students not integrating. I did also see some segregation even between Black and Latinx students. And I think a lot of times it has to do with that lack of understanding of where we come from and our historical background, the history of how a Latinx person came to be. And you know, how the African culture is in our blood, as well as the Spanish culture and so forth, and the Native American culture. So I think it's that lack of understanding, or also it could be because I think within in the spoken word, the student, she mentioned a lot of times, you know, the color of my skin may have people perceive that I don't also experience the oppression that maybe a person of a darker complexion may experience.
Thank you, Dr. Allison, for your question. Is there another? I see some questions in the chat, so I'm going to go ahead and share with the larger group. Brittany asks, how can systemic racism help us understand more about the case of Daniel Prude? Brittany, would you like to? Christine, did you have something?
Yeah, so those are my students. So good job, my first year seminar. Thank you to both speakers for having this presentation during our class time. This is what we're doing today for class. And it's an important part of us understanding what's a semester-long project to understand about Daniel Prude. Who was a man in Rochester, New York, who died in police custody or soon after police custody. And our class is called Memoirs of Mental Illness. So it's understanding people who have mental illnesses as they write about themselves and their experiences. So it's really a class about understanding people. And we're trying to use this case to understand the context of how it's not just an individual, but it happens within a system, and how the criminal justice system and the mental health system both influenced what happened to this person. So it sounds like we're definitely going to watch last week's presentation as homework, but I think that will provide us with some more information. But I was just hoping that some of my students would try to use this, expertise, this group of people who think about this, to help us think more and understand how understanding people includes understanding the systems they exist in.
Thank you so much, Christine. And thank you for inviting your class. I hope that you all are learning quite a bit from this session and that you'll come out to our other sessions as well. Are there any other questions from our faculty, staff, or students at this time? All right. If not, I would like to share also in my current class, Understanding People, we talked yesterday about the importance of cultural values and culture in general in helping us to understand people. One of the articles we looked at focused on the Latinx community specifically. And so the article looked at how cultural stressors, like some of the things that Dr. Kalabatsova talked about, microaggressions, discrimination, how those things are linked to mental health. But the piece that was interesting is they talked about what are some of the buffers to that link, right? So what are some of the things that stops a student from experiencing worsened mental health as a result of cultural stressors? And some of the things that emerged in that study were relatedness or connectedness to family, which in the Latinx community they talk about as familismo. Respeto, they talk about in that context as the importance of respecting your elders and how that translates within the college environment. And the third one was religiosity. And I'm sharing that because I think it's important for us as educators and for peers as well to know how to support our Latinx students, right? And so how can you enhance these things that we know work well for this population? But more importantly than that, this conversation is about how do we dismantle the systems that causes the necessity to actually need to provide those types of supports, right? So at one level, we have to know how to respond to those things that Dr. Kalabatsova talked about in her study. But also, what is it that we can do on a daily basis to actually start to address the things that cause us to even look at protective factors, cause us to actually look at how to support these students, right? If certain systems weren't in place, which Dr. Allison so eloquently discussed with us in our first session, if those systems weren't in place, we wouldn't need to have that conversation to begin with. So just some food for thought before we move to our next segment. Thank you again, Dr. Kalabatsova and Dr. Rodriguez, for sharing this important work with us as it relates to understanding what racism looks like today. At this time, I am distinctly pleased to introduce Marcus Johnson, the Associate Director of Residential Life, who is going to be showcasing a number of students to share with us their narratives as it relates to this topic. Thank you, Marcus Johnson.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson. I appreciate that. And good afternoon, everyone. I'm so happy to be here. And to Dr. Kalabatsova and Dr. Rodriguez, thank you so much for your contribution to this discussion and your research around the subject matter. It's always an exciting day when our students show up. So for all the students on the call, I don't really know how to work Zoom, but I'm going to ask you all to give it that little hand thing that you give, a thumbs up just for being here, because being present and actively engaged in these conversations really means so much to us. And so we are so grateful for that. We do have a group of student leaders here. We know that we can give you the background and the context around everything that we're talking about, but sometimes in order to make it connect for you all, to make it real, is to have you hear those stories from your peers. And so we have 5 of your peers who are here, and they're going to share a little bit of their perspective, their own narrative about how they have experienced their own form of racism at this institution or in their lives. So first, we're going to invite our first student speaker, who is one of the most dynamic and fascinating individuals I met when I first joined this campus. His name is Christian Cabrera. He is from the Atlantic City campus, born and raised in Atlantic City. So Christian, I will invite you to speak to your peers. Everyone, Christian.
Hey, thank you for the introduction, Marcus. Thank you for having me. As we learned today, covert racism comes in many forms. I have a little story to share of my experience with that. Back in high school, I played football for Lane City High School. So me and my friend were out fundraising over in Ventnor. So we're out there fundraising, and we're just going door to door selling these tickets. So we're selling these tickets, and we're not thinking anything of it. All of a sudden, we see a squad car pull up, vendor police vehicle pull up. So there goes one squad car, second squad car, third squad car. And they approach us, and I didn't really think anything of the manner, but they're approaching us, and they're saying, well, you guys aren't allowed to go door to door or anything. Someone called in a complaint. So the interaction it wasn't anything, it seemed racial in the interaction, but I always question myself as though, if me and my friend were of a different complexion, maybe looked a little different, would the interaction have gone the same way with 3 squad cars pulling up on us? So that's just one example I had with covert racism in my experience.
Thank you for sharing, and sorry to hear about that experience. We appreciate you and giving us a little bit of that perspective. Our next student is an RA from the Atlantic City campus. He is a senior. His name is Joey Sennett. And so, Joey, I'm going to invite you to give us a little bit about your perspective.
Thank you. So as a senior, and looking back, basically with all the information presented, I start to wonder, okay, wow, there's so many instances in my life that covert racism has impacted me, or like I've witnessed it, or I witnessed it firsthand, and I'm like, I either dismissed it or I wasn't aware of it. And that's the thing about educating ourselves. So for me, I guess it was like, for a really easy example, I played soccer. So I come from a cultural background. I'm Haitian. So every time I played soccer, I played on a team. I was varsity. So when I first initially started to play, people started to say, Joey, you going to practice? Yeah, I always say I'm going to practice. What practice was it? No, I never said. But every time I went to practice and then they see me play soccer and in uniform, they say, oh, Joey, I never knew you played soccer. They say, yeah, what's up? Why? Because it's like a Spanish or a white sport. I'm like, why? Where does that come from? Like my culture, my background, that's all we do, And for people just to say it's a, cultural sport to play, that's just one example. And we either get stuff like that either day, like every day, like you're supposed to be, you're black, you're supposed to play basketball, all these different things. Either you could dismiss it or become aware of it. So that's just one example for me in soccer.
Thank you for sharing, Joey. Up next, we're going to invite someone who many of you may know. She is extremely popular among the Talons, Miss Destiny Hernandez.
Hi, how are you guys? Thank you for the introduction. I am a Talon here at Stockton University. Honestly, I don't think I've experienced like subtle racism. I've probably only experienced like straight on racism. There is one story that I could say. I was at the grocery store with my mom and I had sprained my ankle and I was like in those things, those wheelie things. I don't know what they're called, those things. And there was a Caucasian lady behind us and she was basically rushing us. And then she basically called me lazy because I was Hispanic. Like, oh, you Hispanics are just so lazy. You can't do anything for yourselves. And she was just going off. I couldn't think of anything that was very subtle. As a Latina, I'm an EOF student. I've always felt comfortable in EOF. That's really my comfort zone in Stockton. So that's really the most.
Thank you, and I'm sorry to hear about that experience as well. These stories are hard to take in sometimes because we all probably have experience in our own way, shape, or form, but when we hear people that we are close to speak about it, it really touches us differently. So I appreciate you guys being vulnerable and sharing that with us. We do have 2 more. Up next, we're going to hear from an RA, Mr. Roy Cook.
Thank you, Marcus. Hello, everyone. So at the last community conversation, I mentioned some of the struggles that people of color and students of color face here. And I highlighted some of the mental traumas, whether they be big or small, that we face that other people may not really think about. So I just want to abide by the 1-minute rule and tell you guys about a story that occurred my freshman year here. So I was in a writing class and I was the only person of color in the class. And the professor would openly encourage the use of the N-word And when we were reluctant to like use the word, like other students were even reluctant to use it, he like came out and said, come on guys, we're not in elementary anymore, the word is, and he proceeded to say the word himself. So now looking back at it, it's like, I see that that was a way of like using his privilege to humiliate me. But that's why it's good to have conversations like this, like these community conversations are good and they're needed. And I just want to thank you guys for allowing me to shed some light on the situation.
Thank you for sharing that, Roy. And last but certainly not least, Ms. Kit Hunter.
Hi everyone, it's nice to see everyone's faces. Like everyone else, I'm gonna keep this pretty brief. So similar to Destiny, it's kind of hard for me to like determine what type of racism I experienced just overall throughout my life and here at Stockton. But I do recall when I was applying to college and even throughout my years here, I'm a senior by the way. I noticed like a lot of people tend to underestimate my education because I am an AB student. I have a 3.7 GPA here. And when I was applying for college, I had people like teachers, guidance counselors tell me like, oh, you'll get plenty of scholarships because you're Black, or you'll get accepted to any school you want because of affirmative action. And at the time, you know, me not really realizing what affirmative action was, I didn't really think about it. But after the presentation, I'm sitting here like, my race doesn't just automatically get me into any college or job position I want. Like, I'm an intelligent person. I apply myself like super hard into everything. Oh, thanks. I'm reading the comments. But it's like I just don't like how people underestimate my level of thinking. Like, I'm super involved with school, but I've always loved learning. Like, my family and especially my grandparents expressed the importance of having an education. And it just bothers me that whenever I'm in a classroom, and especially now this far into my studies, I am the only student of color, or oftentimes I'm the only female participant participating in class discussions. And it's like all they see is a Black woman. But in reality, my grades go way above how I appear to everyone. So yeah.
Thank you for sharing. Thank you to all of you. We recognize that it's an extremely vulnerable space to be able to share something so personal. Thank you to Dr. Ketching for just creating a space for our students to do this, and Dr. Johnson for leading this initiative. I want to remind you all of the importance of sharing your stories. And so I know Dr. Johnson was intentional about making sure that part was not left out in these discussions. And so when we share our stories, it's important that we continue to have that courage, because people will continue to listen. They will hear you, they will see you differently. And so we want to make sure that here we have created a safe space for you. And hopefully in those instances when you've experienced some of these things and it has not always made you feel the way we want you to feel, you know that the people in this room right now, they support you, and they're always going to be there to help you in any way that we can. So again, thank you for showing us and showing up, and we'll continue to learn from you, because you are the reason we're here and you're the reason we will move forward. And so with that being said, Dr. Johnson, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Thank you so much, Marcus. And thank you to each and every one of the students who shared their stories with us. As I said in the last session, we see you, we hear you, and we validate your stories. For everyone else on the call, I hope that the experiences of these students has made the concept of overt and covert racism a bit more real for you. For Black and Brown students and Black and Brown staff and faculty members, these aren't just things that we talk about in these settings. They aren't just things that we write about in the literature. They aren't just things that we research, but they are things that we experience day in and day out. And so I encourage you to get to know the folks whose stories you got a glimpse of today, as well as those whose stories you didn't get a chance to hear today, because there are so many more that we simply don't have an opportunity to highlight. The purpose of these students sharing their truth is to enlighten our Stockton community and to encourage everyone to be an ally to the movement as we endeavor to move towards social justice. So with that being said, I'd like to thank you all for staying with us so far. This next segment is particularly important to ensure that you're actually getting something out of this session, right? That you're actually learning. And so one of our students, Joey Sennett, is going to lead us into a brief review that we invite all of you to participate in. And so we're going to play a brief game to check whether or not you're actually learning and if some of these concepts are resonating with you. And I invite you to please stick with us, because following that, we're going to go into breakout groups and continue to grapple with these concepts and get to know each other, particularly as it relates to the topic for today. Joey, over to you.
Okay. All right, I'm gonna give it like another 2 minutes to join. So if everyone, Barry, Jazz, nice to see you all. All right, give it 1 more minute. All right, I think that's good now. Let's get started.
Yep.
Signs and symptoms of racism. I wish I could play this too, so I'll put the volume up. Is the volume too intrusive?
No, that's perfect.
Okay, now I figured it out. 4, 3, 2, 1. Treatment based off membership of a inner group. Great. Inclusion and justice. All right, next question. Let's see what you got. Oh, Thomas, Niall, Brandy, Naya? Yeah, that's how you say it. Thomas, you're fast. Okay. What are racial health disparities? Heightened risk for minorities. See, I think greater risk for, okay. See, I thought so too. It was 50. Okay. Oh, there's 2 choices. Heightened risk for minorities and or systematically worse. That's true. Next question. Thomas again. Nope, not Thomas. Ah, yeah. Cool. True or false? Racial discrimination associated with the worst physical and mental health. Okay. I feel like most of you are paying attention. You guys got this. True. I could see why you could say false too. But. All right, Jazz. What does racism look like today? I feel like this is like an all the above. All right, perfect. If you have questions in the chat, I can't see it, just in case. Okay. What are microaggressions? Insults, demeaning messages, people of color. All right. This next question will be the last question for time, because I know some of you are in class. What are some effects of microaggression? We'll make this one winner takes all. And I do want to say, I do appreciate each and every one of you doing this Kahoot. And let's see who, Thomas, Robinson, Naya, Jazz, OJ Sim. Okay, so I'm just gonna end the quiz, and I do appreciate each and every one of you for taking this Kahoot.
Thank you, Joey. Thank you so much for facilitating our Kahoot. And thank you to all the students who participated, demonstrating that you were paying attention, that you did learn something here this afternoon. For our winner, Thomas, we'd love to give you a Zoom round of applause. Thomas, please show yourself if you don't mind. Congratulations, Thomas. Look out. Keep an eye on your email. There will be a prize coming your way. So thank you so much for participating. At this time, I am excited to place you all into breakout rooms and allow you to have an opportunity to continue grappling with these concepts and continuing to talk to each other about what does all this mean for you? What does all this mean in your experience here at Stockton and in the other contexts in which you navigate daily? So Mark from IT, our wonderful IT support person, is going to place you in breakout rooms at this time. Each breakout room will be led by one of our students. If you are a faculty or staff member, please stay in the main room. There is a special breakout room specifically for faculty and staff members, which will be led by our speakers for today. So again, if you are a faculty or staff member, please stick with us. This is not the end. Let me remind you all. At the end of the breakout rooms, we will all be coming back to the main room for another minute or two just to close us out and make mention of the assessment that I will be pleading with you to take a few minutes to take. So please enjoy your time in the breakout rooms, and I will see you back here in the main room in about, let's see, in about 20 minutes or so. Thank you. Thank you so much, Candace, for sharing. And thank you to all of you, both staff, faculty members, and students for joining us this afternoon. I hope that this community conversation have moved our collective knowledge forward, particularly as it relates to racism. And most importantly, I hope that you'll share what you've learned here today with your peers and your colleagues. And that you'll use what you've learned as well, that you'll use those things to address racism, both overt and covert, and in turn promote social justice on our campus and within your communities. At this time, with just a few minutes to go, I'm going to share the link to our assessment. It is a brief assessment, and if you care about the conversation we're having here today, it's important for us to be able to identify what we need to do differently, what we can continue doing that we're already doing well, to ensure that we are improving as we go along in this series. So the link was shared in the chat. That link is just for students. I recognize there may have been some confusion with two links at the first session. So I'm only placing the link for the students, faculty and staff members. You'll get an email this afternoon with your link that I ask you to just take a brief moment or two to complete the survey, and we'll be sharing the results of all of that at the end of the semester with the community. So thank you again for joining us this afternoon. Thank you to Dr. Rodriguez and Dr. Kalibakova for serving as our speakers for today. Thank you to Marcus Johnson and the RAs for the student narrative portion of today's conversation. Although our social justice interns were not able to join us this afternoon, I'd like to thank them, even in their absence, for creating the call to action session, the agenda for that session, as well as all the content provided in the breakout rooms were created by the social justice interns housed in the Office of Academic Achievement Programs. So thank you to them. And last but certainly not least, thank you to you all for prioritizing this conversation and making some time in your schedules to be a part of this important discussion. With that, I would like to thank you once more and hope you have a wonderful day. And I hope to see you at subsequent sessions. Our next session is on November 2nd. Our final session is on November 18th, and you will certainly see reminders from me and members of our planning committee in the weeks to come. Have a wonderful day, and thanks for coming.